Okay, so in order for the Grasshopper script I've given you for the laser cutter, you need to, there's a few little extras that you need to include with your version of Grasshopper, and I give them to you in the software folder under Grasshopper laser cutter templates. And it's really simple. One, we're going to just drag and drop into the Grasshopper environment. The other one we're actually going to install as the back end, and it's really essential you do both of these. And again, just like the plugin for 3ds Max, I've given you a little install script. So what I'll do at this time is I'm going to fire up Rhino. And then it's going to ask, we want to open a template. So what this is where the templates really come in handy in understanding what they do. So if I want my Grasshopper sliders to read, they're like a unitless number, right? If I want them to read in inches, I should start with one of these inch templates. And in our case, it's a small object. It's only 12 inches. So we'll do the small objects inches. If I wanted my Grasshopper sliders to read in feet, I would choose one that's in feet. So I'm going to start with the small objects inches template. And then all that is, so let's say you didn't do that. All I really have to do is go to the tools menu, and I can go to options. And then under units, if I don't set this, or I pick just some random template, I can always just set my model units to inches. So you really want to have your model units in inches. And then I click OK. Now before we fire up Grasshopper, there's this install mesh edit tool. So I want to double click on that, and there's a CMD script. So you'll download this to your desktop from Dropbox, and you'll just double click and run it. So that'll place the file where it's supposed to be. Now if it doesn't work on your computer, which it should, there's also a manual instruction file. So you'll go to File in Grasshopper, there's a special folders command, and you'll drag and drop or copy that GH file into that area. So it's pretty simple how that goes. Now for the fab tools, these are for setting layers assignments and a few other things that we probably won't use. That, all I have to do is type in Grasshopper, and I really need just to load those into the Grasshopper environment manually. There's no easy way to really get them in there. So what I do is I go File, New for the new Grasshopper document, and then I can go to those user files, and I'm going to copy those to my desktop, and I'm going to drag and drop them into the Grasshopper environment. So then I should see a Fab Tools panel come up, and then I'll have all my fabrication tools I'll need for this. Okay, so at this time we really don't need Grasshopper yet, so I'll close it. Everything should set up. That gives it a chance for the mesh edit tools to take effect as well. I'll go ahead and I'll import my AutoCAD file from where we left off, and that should be my mesh that came from 3ds Max. Now there's a few things that we do not necessarily need for this operation. And if I go to the shaded view, right, I don't need the streets. So I see I still, when I did my Google Earth trip, I had streets on, so I can delete those. Right, my topography, unless you're cutting topography, we don't need it. So I can delete those mesh planes off. Again, any roadways or railways I'll delete. And it's probably easier to do this from the top view. I'll delete all this off. Okay. Now the other part of this is maybe I only want to, maybe I'm only manufacturing this portion of my model. So I need to go in and I need to clean up some of these extraneous meshes. So the simplest thing is just to select a building and delete it. I can do these and these. I don't need these over here. Or this one. Now, when I get to this point, there's an instance where when I select my building here, it's actually selecting part of another building, and that's just an unfortunate byproduct of this process. So what you need to do is go into Rhino's Mesh Edit tools. So in the Mesh menu, I go down to Mesh Edit, and I can delete mesh faces. So I actually have to go in and select those through that command and hit Enter. Then I should be able to delete that off without affecting another building. So sometimes there are parts of other buildings that you need to be aware of. So I can delete that off. If I select this in this case, right, this is queuing to another building. So I would go back to that same Mesh Edit tool and go to Delete Mesh Faces, select the ones I want to delete, and then I hit Enter. Then I can go and delete off the ones I want. All right, so I want to go around the model and make sure I just clean up everything I want to clean up. Again, I have another one here. So I go to Mesh Edit Tools, Delete Mesh Faces, hit Enter. Then I can delete those off. Now, there's other things in here. So if you were like me and I wasn't really aware that I had roads on or trees on, so the trees come out as these little planes. So those aren't going to be able to be cut on the laser cutter, right? If you look in Google Earth, all they are is a plane, and then they map a TIFF file that looks like a tree on top of it, so you get the image of trees. So I can go ahead and I got to make sure I clean up all of those as well. So the best thing is just to make sure that trees are turned off in your model rip. Okay. Now the last part of this is there's a twofold thing. There's a thing called degenerate faces. So those are like bad mesh faces or duplicate mesh faces. I wanna go ahead and clean those up. So I select everything in my model and I go to Mesh, and that same Edit Tools panel, I'm gonna cull degenerate mesh faces. So culling is essentially removing or parsing through a list of documents or entities. So I'm just gonna cull degenerate mesh faces, and it's gonna remove some of the ones that were bad in that mesh. And that's gonna help us when this script actually gets processed. It's gonna make sure that we get the cleanest model possible. Now the script isn't gonna work on individual buildings, right? Because each one of these is a series of meshes that don't belong to each other. So the last part is I'll select all the stuff that I wanna cut and fabricate and type join. And then now I have one single mesh out of my entire city model, right? And then I go to the top view and I'm gonna handle my scaling operation. So I'm already in inches and my model was already scaled down almost to size to begin with. But I wanna at this time hopefully have everything lined up, everything's pretty much scaled. If you're like me and you don't have it scaled, I'll go ahead and I'll scale it at this time and draw my rectangle for my boundary. I'll select everything and scale my model down to my 12-inch marker. And in this case, it was smaller than 12 inches. Now, for the script to work, it's essential that all your model geometry exists to the positive X coordinate and a positive Y coordinate. And that's just because of the way the sheets get laid out. I can delete off my rectangle. And now I'm ready to use the Grasshopper script. Now, I'm going to warn you, when I open this up, there's going to be a bunch of things in there that we really didn't talk about yet, and you might get a little freaked out. But I've set it up so you really only have to pull the sliders and select what you want, and it should generate your sheets for you pretty simply. So I'll go ahead and fire up Grasshopper, and I'll pull that off to the side. I'll pull my Rhino off to the other side, and I'll go ahead and go to my perspective view. Now, I'm going to go ahead and on that software, I'm going to go ahead and open document. Now, in the software folder for the Dropbox of this class, under software, there's a laser cutter template, and it's got a file extension of GH. So that's the one we're going to open in Grasshopper. Now, I want you to copy that to your desktop. I don't want you to run it from the actual Dropbox folder. Since it's my file, I'm going to run mine from there. So don't mess with it. So copy it down, and then you're going to open it from there. So I'll go ahead and click open. And it'll take it a minute to generate. So you'll see all these fun component things that probably get pretty scary, and you go, oh my God, what the heck is he trying me to do? I don't remember doing any of this. Don't worry about it. I left it there because it's a learning tool. So as you get better at Grasshopper, you'll go in and say, oh, that's how he did this, or that's how he did that. for this stuff, until we get to that advanced point, I'm not going to really spend too much time out of it. All you really need to know is that everything here is unnecessary for you to know, except for one time where the thing fails. And I'll show you when it fails, or if it fails, how to correct that step. What you really are concerned about is all the items on this side. So these are our operational items. These are the ones that are going to, one, control what my slice layers, what layers they go on for my slices, whether or not I group it or not, what the name of that group will be, and then how far from X or Y do I want my piece to be laid out. So if I have a tolerance on the laser cutter of 1/4 inch from my boundaries, I set that here. And then I have this value list. So you can use this for future projects, because I've added in all the thicknesses of acrylic that are available to you in the shop. And you can go and edit this list yourself if you want to start doing MDF or any kind of other thing. You can add that in here as well. And really, it's just a simple math operations that's calculating a number. And then the same thing goes for your tags. So when I lay out the pieces, I want to tag what slice it is in the stack. So I'm going to stack slice 2 on top of 1, slice 3 on top of 2, and so on and so forth. Well, those will generate a piece tag and etch those out on this as well, so you know where they are. And then the last part is our sheet boundaries. So we know that by default, some of you have deviated from this, but by default, the project was set up for a 12-inch by 12-inch sheet, right? You can go bigger or you can go smaller. So the laser cutter bed's like 32 by 18 is the maximum. So you can go all the way up to that if you want to lay out full sheets when you're doing models. Otherwise, for us, it's set up already right out of the box. And then the last part is, we already know how much it's going to cost for this project because I've packaged your materials. But in the future, you may want to have this. So you'll know ahead of time, you'll go to the shop and say, how much is each piece of acrylic, right, per sheet? I can put that cost value into my math calculation here, and I can make a decision on what thickness of acrylic I want for my model, determined by how much cash I have in my pocket at that time. So it's a pretty valuable tool. It covers everything you'll need to really streamline your workflow in the laser cutter on your models, okay? At least for the slicing process. For this, we really don't need it, but it's there for the future. Now, all we really have to do once we get to this point is go ahead and say, okay, I have my sheet size, it's 12 inch by 12 inch, I'm happy with that. And then I have 2 or 3 input areas. One is the actual mesh, which is going to be the one in Rhino that I'm going to put into the script. The second one is viewing my slices, so I'll see them how they slice the model. And then the third one is viewing the text on where each slice is. And then it's going to lay out the sheets for me. So for default, I'm going to start with 1/4 inch acrylic, so that way it cuts less slices and processes the script faster for demonstration. And then I'll change it to an 1/8 inch once we get it set. So how do I set my mesh is right click on input mesh, and I set one mesh, and then in Rhino I click on my my model, and then it should automatically now slice up my model and generate my sheets for me. And I can see what those slices are by looking over here. If I want to hide I can go ahead and hide my my file, and that's what those slices look like on my slice model. And then each one of those corresponds with one of the files cut out here. Now you'll see it's not perfect, and that's mostly because of the way the meshes are handled. So there may be instances where you need to clean up what geometry you have, but it should get you to a point where you can really get that done fairly quickly by just doing boundary edges on everything. Okay? Now, the last part of that is actually getting the geometry into Rhino so I can get it back to AutoCAD. Now right now, if I select in Rhino, I'm not selecting anything from the Grasshopper environment because I actually haven't told Grasshopper that I'm happy with my object sets. I'm still running through design iterations. So now I'll change to an 1/8 inch acrylic, and it'll probably generate more sheets because there's more slices of my model. So at the last part is actually getting that into Rhino so I can export it. And there's 3 triggers, I call them. And it's nice to think of them as triggers because as soon as I pull the trigger, it's going to bake the geometry into Rhino and make it so it's a piece of Rhino. So if I want the sheet boundaries to now be a part of my Rhino environment, I go to the sheet boundaries area where it says safety on, and I pull the trigger, and now I see my rectangles in the Rhino environment, and they're selectable. I'll go ahead and select my tags, and now my tag elements are visible in Rhino. And then the last part is I'll actually do my sheet or my slice boundaries. Now you'll see that some of the boundaries, if they weren't complete objects, they don't bake all the time. And that's dependent upon how well your mesh was taking and how much you clean up that mesh to be solid objects. In the event that your mesh isn't a solid object or you don't get all the objects fully baked, what you'll need to do is go over to the actual working file, and this is most likely why it's saying that my boundary surfaces is having an issue. So what I'll do is I'll just go to my project pieces area here, and I'll right click on that, and I'll just bake that object in manually. And I'll tell it I want to go on the cut blue layer. So now I've manually pushed those in there. And once I can troubleshoot it a little farther and figure out how we can get it so that anything will generate, I'll issue that revision to this script. But at this time, it really gets you about 80% of the way you need to be, and then we'll do the rest of the cleanup in AutoCAD. Okay, so at this time, I can go ahead and close my Grasshopper script, and then I'm left now in Rhino with all of my sheets laid out. Now, I'm not assigning a layer color yet because there's a glitch in Rhino 5 that it doesn't actually output ACI colors, which is what the laser cutter likes. It likes magenta, it likes red, it likes blue, it likes cyan. We'll handle that in the AutoCAD file. So the last part is I'll file, export selected, and I'll actually push that to an AutoCAD drawing. And I have my laser cutter file here, and I'll just go ahead and save that. And I'll do polylines for this. It's always good to do polylines for the laser cutter operations. And then that's it. I'm done with my Rhino file. And I would probably want to save it at this time, so I can go back and adjust it if I need be. Okay, so then in AutoCAD, I'll go ahead and fire up AutoCAD here. I'll continue that. Now in AutoCAD, I've already made a sample layout, so you can go back and check the sample layout to see if you're lining it up like mine. But there's a few things I want to show you that you need to do once you get the file open in AutoCAD. I'm going to go File and open that newly created file. It says I put mine on my desktop. Right, and everything's going to be the same color. But hopefully, if you did everything right and the script worked for you, I should see my cut layer, my etch layer, and then my no plot layer. But you'll see that all the colors are situated as black. So at this time, I'll go in and I'll actually manually change my color in AutoCAD to be an ACI color. Right now, Rhino only does the true color value, and that's the RGB value, the 255 by 0 by 0, or whatever it may be. I'll go to AutoCAD's index color and say that this definitively is an index color of 5, and it's called blue. And that should change all my cut layers now to where they need to be, and the laser cutter should see them. Do the same thing for my etching layer, and then I'll do the same thing for my no plot layer, convert that to a white index color. Right? And then from there, it's just laying out my sheets where I want to cut them on the laser cutter bed. Now I've gone ahead and taken this file and assembled a sample layout. So I've done it for Chicago here when I did my test model. And this is available to you. There's a few things I want to talk about with this template that I'm giving you. You should probably start by using this file and copying your work into this file to be cut. Because what you're going to get in your package is the first piece. This area is going to be cut on a piece of 1/4 inch MDF. And what that is it's a registration marker for the laser cutter so that all of your pieces cut out at the same point, and you can utilize the whole entire piece of acrylic for cutting. What happens is the laser cutter it's got so many holes in it for getting the smoke out of the bed itself, and our pieces are sometimes smaller than those holes, so the pieces get sucked through. So we want to stop the pieces from getting sucked through. So we handle that by putting that 1/4 inch piece of MDF on the bed, and then we etch this onto the top of that sheet of MDF, and we're going to leave it in there for the whole entire cutting operation. So that way every sheet cuts out at the same registration point. Now these yellow areas, you may choose to cut them or you may choose not to cut them. But what happens is the next sheet you're going to cut is going to be the one on the right here. And those pieces correspond with these pieces that you're going to cut out of acrylic or wood or whatever it may be that you want to cut them out of. And those get placed in these troughs that get etched. And that's so essentially you have, you're recreating your own laser cutter bed that has 0, 0 marked accurately. Because right now when you get to the laser cutter, 0, 0 is always arbitrary. And you always got to kind of guess where it's at. This will make it so your 0, 0 is always exactly the same when you cut it on the bed. And then these other lines are set up for you to fine-tune the laser cutter settings. So you'll run through and get it so the pieces just barely cut all the way through, so you can try and use less tape when you pull this out. And that's what the TA is going to help you with, is really this setup portion and making sure that everything, these 2 steps get handled perfectly for you, so that way you can maximize your time efficiently. The other part is you'll want to have the base etched out so you know where to place things on the acrylic. Now you probably, this was my test piece, so you won't be etching anything on the base other than just etching the boundaries of the buildings. Everything else, like the waterways, the grass, is going to be handled in a different method by your diagrams. And we're not going to cut the diagrams out on colored acrylic any longer. I've got a better idea that's faster for everybody and cheaper. So the only money you got to spend is just cutting out these models, okay? And we'll talk about that after the models are done. So keep your diagrams, keep them in the back of your head, make sure you still have them and you're revising them. But we're going to go on once everybody gets close to being done and talk about how we're going to handle that. Okay, is there any questions about that process? Okay, so then I expect next week for you to have all of your, at least the base file cut, and maybe a few slices starting to come together on your models. And you should be working with the other groups to make sure everybody's cutting and working this out at the same way. Now, there's 1/8 inch chipboard that is also coming with your package. That is to be used for your individual finals as well as test pieces for making sure that all of you are lined up before you cut on acrylic. So you can use that for that process in case you want to test yourself out. Okay?